Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. That sounds so lame, so let me just do it in my own voice. Bounty hunting is a complicated profession. We are learning that very early on in The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is set about 5 years after Return of the Jedi, before the new J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson trilogy. Let's dive into all the reasons why I think this show works. Minor spoilers ahead, although I gotta admit, I'm seeing major spoilers out there on the World Wide Web and social media, so I don't think I'm gonna be the one kind of dropping something that's not already out there. Now, this is vintage Star Wars. Of all the new products in the Star Wars universe, Rogue One really has been the one that I love the most. And it's not just because it has a bunch of Asians in it. I am one with the Force, and the Force is one with me. Now, this is vintage Star Wars. Everything about this show feels familiar. It's worn in, it's gritty, it's dirty, it feels like it's been around for a long time. Star Wars has never really been about original ideas for me. I'm sorry. Its charm and its popularity, brilliance has really been about how it just leans into archetypes and how it uses an homage to other cinematic influences. When you think about it being a space western, when you think about Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, but you think about John Ford and Sergio Leone, Clint Eastwood, sort of that lone space gunman, the Han Solo type character. But Star Wars has always had a foundation in samurai films. It's always been about the Eastern influences, the Force and Jedi and warriors and masters. And so if you really want to understand why I like The Mandalorian as much as I do, is that it really has a lot of Western and Eastern samurai Ronin type of influences. And that comes straight from its influence of Akira Kurosawa, who directed Yojimbo, The Hidden Fortress, The Seven Samurai, all these films about Ronins who are masterless samurais. They're drifters, and they really operate in a period of transition, similar to a lot of the Westerns that were about the post-Civil War, where you have this space in between lawlessness and order, right? The Old West and bringing on civilization. The Ronins oftentimes were masterless, and it was after a lot of civil war in Japan, and they had a code, but oftentimes they were masterless, they were drifters, and really you get the sense that that is what the Mandalorian is. So we're finding out through this character that he's a bounty hunter. It starts out that he really is a profession for hire. He's muscle for hire. It's all about money. He has no real allegiance to anybody. The Empire, the Rebellion, or the Resistance, which is not yet fully formed. And so he just takes on jobs for people that have jumped bail. But then he gets an assignment working for somebody that it's clear, based upon the stormtroopers that surrounds the character played by Werner Herzog, that he's doing some type of job for the Empire or the First Order. You just never know what the names are in this transitional period yet. And then at the end of the first episode, and this is just all over social media now, he ends up getting his bounty, his mark, which is, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's a baby Yoda. And it's a very cute baby Yoda. Let me tell you, the baby Yoda looks so fake, and it works. It is perfect. It is awkward. It looks plastic, rubbery. It reminds me in a lot of ways of E.T. And in some ways, it functions like E.T. It's kind of gangly. It's really wide-eyed. It doesn't understand what's going on. It's both cute and to the Mandalorian, he's a nuisance. But at least the baby Yoda, the child, looks like something that's very physical and has weight and dimension to it. I was recently watching one of the old prequels, and with all the CGI, the weightless, the shiny, completely artificial Yoda, and it just took away from the charm and the realism, as much as you can say a realistic puppet. So the baby Yoda really adds some level of some of the lessons we learned from some of the properties in Star Wars that have been too CGI. Another thing that's really working for The Mandalorian is that it's focused on mystery and character development. Who is the Mandalorian? So there are 3 episodes in, and we're learning a little bit more about the Mandalorian and his people. So it turns out he's really not a loner. He may go out on assignments by himself. There's a hint in the 3rd episode that Mandalorians only go out one at a time. But beneath the surface, there is a small community of Mandalorian folks that really have been forced into hiding, and that it's really a small remnant or pocket of them. And they have a code. They refer to it many times of it is the way. And so there's something that is guiding them, so that even though he works for hire and he does an assignment for the Empire, by the end of episode 3, we see that Mando, as he's called Mando, hopefully he's not related to Lando. That'd be really cool if Lando was a Mando, but I digress. We start to see this moral development, that it's not simply about the bounty. It's not simply about the money. It's not simply about preserving his people, because he makes a decision in a lot of ways that puts his people at risk. And yet by doing so, the rest of the Mandalorians come to his rescue, which is similar, I think, to a lot of samurai films. And that's one of the things that I think distinguishes the Mandalorian being more about Eastern influence than purely space westerns and the loner cowboy. When you even think about some of the famous westerns like The Magnificent Seven, it's referencing the Seven Samurai, having cowboys that have some type of moral code, and they aren't just drifters. They aren't just exploiting a lawless land. The samurai, the Ronin, still had a moral code, and oftentimes they would defend people. They would still live and abide by a code, even if it meant their death. And that was something huge in Eastern influences, having a noble death, that they did not fear death as much as they feared a meaningless death or a cowardly life. So it makes sense why I love The Mandalorian. I think the acting, it's fine. It's great. It's populating with a number of small characters. The Nick Nolte character who says, "I have spoken," and he kind of looks like Nick Nolte, even though he's an alien, and even though, let's be honest, he probably looks healthier than real life Nick Nolte, but it's a perfect character to bring the essence of Nick Nolte into the Star Wars universe. Hey, Star Wars, maybe you can do the same thing for Gary Busey, because let's be honest, he's not pretty to look at, but he's got a distinct voice, he's very charismatic. Let's make a Gary Busey Star Wars alien character, and then make him look more presentable so it doesn't hurt the eyes to look at him. But everything about this show I'm enjoying. The weapons are really cool, the mystery, the music is fabulous. I love the fact that they're short episodes. You know, some people might say, why aren't they an hour long? Why aren't they longer versus about the 35 to 40 minute runtime? Well, I suspect first that it just costs a lot of money. So they're putting a lot of money behind this show, and so the longer each episode is, the more that it would cost. The show is really kind of coming back to some of the older serialized Saturday morning type of matinee shows. That's really about space jockeying. It's about fun. It's not overly complicated, and that's been one of the charms of the show, and even so far, The Mandalorian's mask, because there's still this element of mystery, and so much of what he communicates is through subtle physicality and gestures, because we don't see any facial expressions. His voice is pretty monotone at this point, and I'm not sure how long that's going to work, and whether that's going to be limiting that lack of emotional expression you often get from a character. But right now, the show is really working because it's not overly ambitious. It's not explaining everything. Something that I think the prequels did a disservice to Star Wars. The recent Han Solo film, in terms of like giving us answers to things that either we never asked for, or your answer that you gave was so ridiculous and absurd that it really was to the detriment of the story. Overall, I would give The Mandalorian a solid A-. For me, Rogue One is the only recent Star Wars film that comes close to holding its own against the original trilogy. It's early on. I've only watched 3 episodes, but I'm glad about the shift now it's really more about being on the run. And I just think that this show is really smart so far in what it's done. It's not biting off more that it can chew. And based upon the reception I'm seeing on YouTube and through social media, the people that are watching this show are really enjoying it for what it is. And what it is, it's just a lot of fun. It's very charming. It's easily digestible, and it ends in ways that I can't wait to see what happens next. But tell me what you think about The Mandalorian. Am I making too much out of a show that really is slight and thin? Do you think that the mask and the one-dimensional character development is actually working against it rather than for it? I really want to hear what you guys think about The Mandalorian, and most likely I will do a follow-up episode reviewing the second half of the show. Be also on the lookout for a Psych Cinema episode where I break down the psychology of The Mandalorian, and specifically about samurais and the moral code and the moral psychology in Star Wars. And if you're not familiar, that's something I've actually written about in a book on Star Wars psychology. It's edited by Travis Langley, and I wrote a chapter on samurais, Star Wars, and the underdog. And so that, I think there's a lot that it's following in the footsteps of some of the original content that I wrote. But thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe. I am Jonathan Hetterly. Until next time, thanks for watching.